So I want you to imagine you're hiking in the Pacific Northwest, right? You're like pushing through these dense, wet ferns after a really hard rain.
Oh, yeah, that classic moody, foggy forest vibe.
Exactly, exactly. And you look down, and there in the mud is this clean, readable footprint. You see the pad, you see the claws, the size, and your brain just, it immediately categorizes it, right?
Right, you're like, okay, that's a black bear.
Yeah. It's a biological data point that you completely understand. But then you walk maybe a few yards further and you find a track that just, well, it completely breaks all the rules.
Right.
We're talking like 14 inches long, deeply pressed into the earth, totally flat with 5 distinct toes. And it has these anatomical details that, frankly, simply shouldn't exist in North America.
Yeah, you've suddenly stepped right out of the categorized world and into something entirely different.
I mean, it really is a shock to the system.
Yeah.
So welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking on just an enormous stack of sources today to explore the enduring, maddening mystery of Bigfoot.
It really is maddening, isn't it?
Oh, totally. And we have like a wild variety of material to go through. Declassified FBI files, modern genetic studies, incredibly dense academic biomechanical papers, and these profound Native American oral histories. But our mission today isn't to just, run around the woods with thermal cameras on a monster hunt.
Right, no night vision goggles today.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We are looking at this whole phenomenon to contrast two radically different ways of understanding the world.
Right, because you have this one approach that is deeply rooted in traditional oral history and the spiritual beliefs of indigenous peoples, which views this entity as like an integral, respected part of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And then on the exact opposite side, you have this rigorous physical scientific analysis of footprint, morphology, DNA, environmental data, all attempting to classify and quantify the creature.
So whether you are like a hardened skeptic who demands peer-reviewed data or a curious believer looking for truth in the shadows, you're going to see how our search for this creature reveals just an incredible amount about how we as humans try to make sense of the wild.
Absolutely. And to truly grasp the scope of this, we really need to begin with the oldest sorts of information we have on this. I mean, long before anyone was pouring plaster into mud tracks or running PCR tests on hair samples, the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest had a deeply established understanding of what this entity actually is.
Right.
And they absolutely do not view it as some terrifying, undiscovered ape just waiting to be dissected.
Which is such a massive contrast, right? Because mainstream culture produces these intense, dramatic documentaries where people are out there trying to capture or kill Bigfoot just to prove a point.
Exactly.
It's like the difference between wanting to capture the wind in a jar just to prove it exists versus, learning how to sail and respecting the weather.
Oh, I love that analogy. That's perfect. Yeah. The traditional indigenous perspective in our sources is entirely built on relationship. For many tribes, this creature often referred to as Sasquatch, which comes from the Halkomelem word seskets.
Right, right.
Or sometimes called Istaihe. It's seen as family. It's a spirit. It operates essentially as a protector or a caretaker of the land.
We really need to treat these native oral traditions as the profound knowledge systems that they actually are. I mean, these aren't just spooky campfire ghost stories.
No, not at all. They are meticulous ecological observations. They're societal laws passed down and heavily vetted through generations. According to these teachings, Istaihe has coexisted with humans for millennia.
Wow.
Yeah, the elders teach that this being is practically a model of ecological balance. It takes only what it needs from the forest. It supposedly knows the local languages, sings specific songs, and this is fascinating, it actually shares natural resources with the people.
Wait, really? Like it actually shares food?
Yeah. The oral histories describe the creature guiding people to productive huckleberry bushes or, prime mushroom hunting grounds.
That is wild. So instead of a monster to be feared, it's almost treated like, I don't know, an elusive neighbor you share a fence with. You respect their space, they respect yours. And our sources specifically mention this concept called a Chi-Tamanwit, right? Or Tamanwit's law.
Yes.
Which is this unwritten foundational law, meaning that every single action, every thought, every harvest you make has a ripple effect that impacts the 7th generation to come. So under this law, Bigfoot serves a very specific, almost regulatory ecological function.
Right. It operates as an environmental barometer. When you analyze the historical accounts, the sightings of this protector correlate heavily with environmental destruction.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, when human activity tips into greed, like when there is clear-cut logging or aggressive mining or just corporate exploitation stripping the land, that is exactly when the protector makes its presence known.
Which makes sense of those stories in the sources where, like, massive logging equipment is found totally destroyed or flipped over in the deep woods.
Exactly.
From a Western perspective,
Yeah.
that gets framed as, a terrifying monster attack.
Hmm.
But through the lens of Tamanwit's law, it's basically a neighborhood eviction notice. Like, if humans take beyond their means, if they disrespect the earth and alter the climate to the point of causing droughts or destroying the harvest seasons, the protector pushes back. It is this physical warning to walk lightly, leave no trace, and remember that humans are just one small part of the ecosystem, not the masters who own it.
Well said. And that reverence is just woven into everyday cultural practices. The sources detail how people actually leave traditional offerings to these relatives.
Like what kind of offerings?
Things like tobacco, flat cedar, or Indian money, just to show respect to the land and to the protector. And the artistry honoring the creature is incredibly thoughtful, too.
Right, the masks.
Yes. One artist described carving a mask to look intentionally feminine and dignified, rather than like some snarling, aggressive gorilla, because they view it as a being with its own complex, respectable character.
And there was another artisan who created a traditional dress representing the creature.
Yeah.
And they used intentionally large, rough stitches.
Yeah.
Exactly. The logic being that a giant being wouldn't use perfect, tiny human stitches. They'd probably use large deer sinew.
The level of empathy there is just beautiful. It's a worldview where everything is alive, everything is related, and, mystery is allowed to just exist.
Yeah.
But then you have modern Western science, which is just completely paralyzed by the lack of a physical body. To bridge that gap, formal institutions have gone to incredible, almost absurd lengths for physical proof.
Right. It's fascinating that indigenous cultures accept this creature as a given part of the ecosystem, while Western culture is just desperate to force it into a specimen jar.
So true. And that desperation brings us to the formal institutional investigations. Because, like in 1976, the FBI actually opened a file on Bigfoot.
Which is just crazy to think about.
Right. This prominent cryptozoologist named Peter C. Byrne, he sent the FBI 15 hairs attached to a small piece of skin and requested an analysis. And the FBI Scientific Research Division actually agreed.
Yeah, they ran the samples through transmitted and incident light microscopy. They were examining the root structures, the medulla, the cuticle of the hair.
I just love that the FBI took it seriously enough to run the forensics. But the results of those tests and the modern DNA testing that followed decades later paint a very specific picture. When researchers run genetics on these quote-unquote anomalous primate hairs found in the woods, the results don't come back as a brand new species of giant ape.
No, they do not.
They come back as known animals. Often, the DNA belongs to ungulates.
Which really highlights a major issue with physical evidence collection.
Because an ungulate is a hoofed mammal. We're talking about deer, elk, horses, or cows. The idea that someone finds a massive, flat, five-toed footprint, picks up a hair right next to it, and the DNA comes back as a deer.
Yeah.
I mean, it just shows how easily environmental contamination happens.
Oh, absolutely. You were probably just picking up the hair of a deer that walked through that exact same mud patch earlier that week.
Exactly.
Contamination is a massive factor. And when the samples aren't hoofed mammals, they usually point toward another prime suspect. There was this famous genetic study led by an Oxford geneticist, Brian Sykes, and he analyzed hairs attributed to Bigfoot and the Yeti.
Oh, I remember this one.
Yeah, a sample from Alaska, which was long purported to be Bigfoot, came back as a perfect match for a modern brown bear. And samples from the Himalayas matched ancient polar bear DNA. So the biological data repeatedly points to bears.
Which perfectly sets up that spatial analysis study we looked at by data scientist Flo Foxon. This is where the hard numbers try to step in and explain the phenomenon.
Right.
Foxon took decades of Bigfoot sighting data compiled by the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization. They have this massive database of geographic coordinates for every reported sighting across the U.S. and Canada. And Foxon took that map and laid it over other data maps using this complex statistical model.
The methodology is brilliant in its simplicity, really. Foxon mapped the Bigfoot sightings against human population density, forest cover density, and the specific population maps of the American black bear, Ursus americanus.
And the correlation was huge, right?
Incredibly strong. In regions where you have a dense black bear population intersecting with dense forest and a moderate human population, you see a massive spike in Bigfoot sightings.
Which honestly makes complete psychological sense.
Mhm.
If you are hiking in the deep woods at dusk, your brain is already on high alert. You see a massive dark shape moving through the trees,
Yeah,
and an adult black bear standing on its hind legs reaches roughly 4 to 6.5 feet tall.
right.
That closely overlaps with the lower end of Bigfoot height estimates.
Yeah.
And a bear standing up to get a better look at you, or to reach berries on a high branch, has a strangely human-like silhouette.
Fox's study essentially argues that a significant percentage of these sightings are simply misidentified black bears walking bipedally, which is a behavior they exhibit way more often than people realize. The statistical overlap is actually so tight that the study suggests Bigfoot sighting reports could actually be used as a form of citizen science.
Wait, really?
Yeah, you could literally track the health and movement of black bear populations for conservation efforts simply by monitoring where people claim to see Bigfoot.
Okay, that is super clever. And I can totally buy that a fleeting visual sighting is just a bear on its hind legs.
Yeah.
Human perception is incredibly flawed, especially when we are scared. But, and this is a big but, the bear theory hits a massive brick wall when we look at the ground.
Yes, it does.
A bear paw, with its distinct pad and claw marks, looks absolutely nothing like a 14-inch flat, 5-toed hominid foot. How does the misidentified bear theory explain the thousands of giant footprints left behind in the mud and snow?
Right.
We can't just assume every single track out there is a wooden cutout strapped to some prankster's boots.
Exactly. The persistence of those highly detailed footprints is what pushes the investigation from statistical ecology straight into the realm of functional morphology. This brings us to the scientific counterargument championed by researchers like Dr. Jeff Meldrum, a professor of anatomy and anthropology, and the late physical anthropologist Dr. Grover Krantz.
Right.
They look at the intricate biomechanics of the footprint casts and argue that they cannot simply be dismissed as hoaxes, and they definitely aren't bears.
And they prefer the term relict hominoids, right? Just to kind of strip away the tabloid stigma of Bigfoot.
Yes. They place this creature within a strict evolutionary framework. Krantz actually theorized that these beings could be surviving descendants of Gigantopithecus,
Which was a real thing.
a very real massive ape that lived in Asia during the Pleistocene epoch and went extinct roughly 100,000 years ago. Krantz proposed that a progenitor population of these giant apes could have migrated across the Bering Land Bridge into North America, utilizing the exact same route that ancient humans later used.
It provides a biologically plausible origin story. And the physical evidence they use to support this theory is heavily based on the anatomical architecture of the foot. The sources highlight casts taken from the Blue Mountains in Washington state in 1996, which measured 35 centimeters long.
Massive.
Yeah. And they also heavily analyzed the tracks left behind during the famous 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film shot at Bluff Creek, California.
The Patterson-Gimlin film is just a perfect example of how deep this analysis goes. Comprehensive independent studies have analyzed the film grain, the frame rate physics, and even the way the muscles move under the fur on the subject's thigh.
Wow.
And the consensus among these specific researchers is that the film was not visually altered or tampered with. It wasn't just a cheap costume. The center of gravity and the mass distribution point to a massive biological subject.
And because they cast the footprints left in the mud that very day, researchers can actually analyze the creature's exact gait.
Right, and the architecture of those footprints is the real crux of the relict hominoid argument. Human beings possess a rigid longitudinal arch. We evolved to run long distances on the relatively flat terrain of the African savanna, so our foot functions essentially as a stiff lever to propel us forward.
Okay, great.
The Sasquatch footprints show a completely different evolutionary adaptation. They exhibit what anthropologists call a mid-tarsal break.
Okay, wait, let me make sure I'm picturing this right. A human foot is like, well, it's like a rigid diving board, right? It's stiff, it stores energy, and it bounces you forward.
It's a great way to visualize it.
But these footprints show a foot that is flat and highly flexible right across the middle, the transverse tarsal joint. So it's more like a suspension bridge that can bend and adapt in the middle. When this creature walks, its midfoot flexes deeply into the ground.
Exactly. And that flexibility creates what's called a compliant gait. In human walking, we use a stiff-legged stride. We bob up and down, striking the ground hard with our heels, which sends this shockwave right up our legs.
Ouch.
A compliant gait entirely lacks that vertical oscillation. The knees remain bent, the hips stay level, and the foot basically acts as a massive shock absorber. Witnesses often describe the creature as gliding rather than walking.
Because they aren't bouncing up and down. They are rolling through the step, absorbing the shock in the middle of the foot.
Precisely. This mechanism drastically reduces peak ground reaction forces. Think about it. If you are a massive 800-pound biped trying to navigate steep, uneven, broken terrain in a dense mountainous forest, a stiff human arch would just shatter under your own weight.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
You would absolutely need a flexible, flat foot with a mid-tarsal brake to survive that environment.
And the biomechanical details they find in these casts are just mind-blowing. When that flexible foot pushes off in deep mud, it creates what researchers call a mid-tarsal pressure ridge.
Right. To visualize that, imagine pressing your hands together and bending your knuckles inward. The middle pushes outward. When a foot with a mid-tarsal brake pushes off, the middle of the foot bulges downward into the earth. It leaves a distinct amount of dirt pushed up in the center of the footprint. A human foot, encased in a shoe or even barefoot, simply cannot mechanically produce that ridge.
It's like someone trying to fake a Ferrari, right?
Okay, I'm listening.
Like, a casual hoaxer might build a fiberglass shell that looks like a sports car from a distance to fool their neighbors. But these footprint casts are the equivalent of a hoaxer secretly engineering a perfectly functioning, biologically accurate V12 engine beneath the hood.
That is exactly what it's like.
Right, because a guy stomping around the woods with carved woody feet wouldn't know to engineer a mid-tarsal pressure ridge into the wood. They wouldn't understand the ground reaction physics required to fool a professor of anatomy.
They absolutely wouldn't. And the biological consistency extends even further than that. Some pristine footprint casts have revealed dermal ridges, actual microscopic fingerprints on the soles of the feet, showing sweat pores and wear patterns consistent with a living creature.
That's insane.
Furthermore, when researchers analyze casts purportedly made by the creature's hands, they note the absence of a thenar eminence.
The thenar eminence is that thick mass of muscle at the base of the human thumb, right?
Yes, exactly. That muscle mass drives our opposable thumbs, allowing us to grasp tools. The casts show a flat palm without that muscle, indicating a non-opposable thumb. It is an incredibly specific primate anatomical detail to include in a supposed hoax.
The biological consistency is just too precise to dismiss as a widespread, coordinated joke.
And that consistency is what sustains the scientific pursuit. Dr. Meldrum points out an astonishing piece of global convergence that adds immense weight to this whole thing.
Oh, the China casts.
Yes. In 1995, a park ranger in China's Shenangjia Nature Reserve cast a set of tracks attributed to their local cryptid known as the Yeren or wildman.
Half a world away in an entirely different ecosystem.
Exactly. And when those Chinese casts were brought to the United States and analyzed, they exhibited the exact same biomechanical mechanics. They had a distinct mid-tarsal pressure ridge. They showed the exact same double convexity, that downward bulging of the midfoot.
Wow.
The anatomical architecture perfectly converged with the North American data from the Patterson-Gimlin tracks and the Blue Mountain tracks. The Chinese ranger who poured that plaster had absolutely no knowledge of the North American Sasquatch phenomenon, and certainly no knowledge of the obscure biomechanical debates about mid-tarsal breaks among Western anthropologists.
There was zero cultural cross-contamination.
Yeah.
You have independent data points across the globe producing the exact same invisible anatomical engineering.
It's incredible.
So we have looked at this mystery through two deeply distinct lenses today. Through the lens of Western science, we're tracking a potential undiscovered, heavy-footed relict hominoid, perhaps a surviving Gigantopithecus, leaving behind anatomically complex tracks that defy easy debunking, while also acknowledging that many sightings are likely just misidentified black bears. And through the indigenous lens, we are looking at a spiritual caretaker, the protector, urging humans to respect the land and its resources through Tamanwut's law.
And despite utilizing entirely different methodologies, both lenses ultimately lead you to the exact same realization about human nature.
Yeah.
We possess a deep, unresolved yearning for a connection to the natural world. Whether you are meticulously mapping black bear population overlaps in a statistical model, or analyzing the flex of a mid-tarsal joint in plaster, or honoring the deep reverence of indigenous oral history, this phenomenon forces you to reconsider your relationship with the environment.
Absolutely.
It demands that we look at the woods not just as a resource to be extracted, but as a place of profound mystery and consequence.
It brings us right back to that footprint in the mud, right? You're staring at it, trying to figure out if it's an undiscovered primate, a misidentified bear, an elaborate hoax, or a forest spirit. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today. If science eventually proves, without a shadow of a doubt, that a biological Gigantopithecus does not exist in these woods, does that make the indigenous knowledge system of the protector any less real or necessary?
That is a great question.
Perhaps the true survival adaptation of Bigfoot isn't biological camouflage at all? Maybe its greatest survival mechanism is psychological endurance, evolving into whatever myth, monster, or data point we need to remind us that we are not the absolute masters of the wild.
A vital reminder that the forest still holds secrets we cannot easily categorize, and perhaps shouldn't try to.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Walk lightly out there.